Hello again, and this little video essay or lecture is going to be on Jonathan Haidt and Lenor Skenazy's the Fragile Generation. First of all, Jonathan Haidt, I will sing his. Lenor Skenazy was actually, I think, a writer for the New York Post for years, and she sort of made big news when I think she let her 8 or 9 year old son, very young anyway, ride the subway home in New York City. She lives in New York City alone. And I'm assuming, and then she ended up writing about it. Now the kids need more independence, not less. They're too coddled, which led and Jonathan Haidt. It might be one of the more important intellectuals in my view in America right now. He has another book. I'll see if I can find it over here. Where is it? Hang on. Right. Sorry about that. The Righteous Mind. This is worth reading by Mr. Haidt, which is about basically the roots, the intellectual and emotional sort of roots of conservative and liberal people, and just a study, a really deep and intense and smart and engagingly readable study of human morality itself, which is utterly fantastic. And anyway, this work is a bit of an extension, I think, for him of that work. And the book this would have come out of would be called "The Coddling of the American Mind." I don't have a copy of that here on me, but if any of you were touched by this, and I usually have some students who really like this. Haidt has lots of YouTube clips of him talking, discussing this, lots of podcast appearances of him speaking to this, and he's a really engaging speaker and known as an awesome professor. He's over at NYU, and I highly encourage almost anything Haidt has done is worth reading. Great admirer of his. Anyway, and on this one, the fragile generation, and the point being, they open right with a few stories of kids. One boy was chopping wood, or another kid. There was another story. I don't think this is from that piece. I might be thinking of something else, where there were two brothers. Who were walking in their little town, I think it was in North Carolina or somewhere, walking to their park. The oldest brother, I think, he might have been 11 or 12, and then there was a 9 and an 8-year-old or something, or maybe it was 12, whatever it was. It was an older and a younger brother, and maybe two younger brothers. And the oldest one, again, 11, 12 years old. And I remember being 11 or 12 years old, growing up in Springdale here in Stanford, and walking, I walked all over my neighborhood. I left in the morning, like during the summertime, and came home to get something to eat for lunch at some point at my own leisure, and basically was told to come home when it got dark out. And that was it. My parents had no idea where I was all day. I was wandering around the whole neighborhood. And Haidt is, and they're making the argument that we need to go back to that sort of one. It isn't quite as rare as when I survey my students as they might be implying, or maybe it is in other places here. But they're when you try to be over. We all want to protect children, and I always remember when as far as becoming a new parent, that it was the giving up, losing all my free time and all that didn't really bother me so much. And what really, it was that sort of what I wasn't quite prepared for was that terror, anything might happen to my little girl. Right away, I have one child, and so I get the impulse. I also remember her losing her once in she was acting like a little bit of a brat. Actually, it was. We were in Target. She must have been 2, 3, very young, and she was sort of going to where her mother was looking at some clothes somewhere for herself, and I was supposed to be, of course, watching Abigail, and I was, but she was messing around with the shoes, and she kept knocking off the shoes, like off the shelves, and sort of giggling at me as I'm scrambling to put them up, pick them up, put them back on the shelf, and trying to follow her. And boom, she darted away from me for a second, and I went out and man, it really wasn't long, and I went out after, and there was another couple little corners, so she, just kind of ran as fast as she could a couple of places. I looked, I didn't see her right away, went there, and I took a right when I should have taken a left. And anyway, I ended up losing her for, I bet it wasn't more than 5 minutes, but man, it was the first time that it happened. It would happen a couple more times over the course of her early youth, and I wouldn't panic quite. But every time, though, I did a little bit. This time it was, that first time, my mind went right to, what if somebody snatched her, or which is, but again, the chances of this happening, are like, it's so rare. I think, and this, the whole children. This is one of the points they make. Stranger danger, as is sort of commonly known these days, and actually, its origins probably trace back to the 19th century. There was actually an interesting podcast. You're Wrong About, I think is the title of the podcast. It did a whole thing on stranger danger, and it was really well researched and sort of fascinating. But really, I think in our modern times, what we really trace it back to was the 80s, which is when I was growing up, by the way. And so I remember all this, and basically. And it's interesting how these things sort of happened, because from 1965 to 1985, the divorce, a huge cultural change in this country, where the divorce rate triples across those 20 years, which meant a lot of kids. And again, now your parents get divorced. The dads are, I think, not all, but are much more likely to sort of be very involved with their kids, and people co-parents, and the family in some ways doesn't end, but just sort of expands into this different sort of thing. And it's and even if it isn't as ideal ideal as the nuclear family always staying together, that we seem to have a couple of generations have now gone through this, and we seem to have adapted to it a little bit better. But back then, I could remember a lot of parents get divorced. The mother was often on her own, and wasn't, again, these days. You're just as often to hear about a woman getting overcompensated during the divorce. I think it happened a little less then, and again, this was all still new. Oftentimes, father went off, started another family, stayed with that family, never saw his old kids, and the mother would be stuck working 2-3 jobs trying to stay in the old house that the father had bought for them, or that that they bought together, but the father's income maybe had been mostly supporting it. Boy, that was rough on a lot of single mothers having tough lives and figuring out a way to protect their children, and also a lot of kids. Home all alone, the latchkey kids, as they would come to be known. And that was, and I can remember my classmates in my grade, where they used to wear the latchkeys with shoelaces around their necks, almost like crucifixes. It was sort of a very kind of a bit of a dark irony, the way they. The way I remember that, and anyway, because of that, I think you started getting all these stories. It was a lot of anxiety out in the culture because of it, right? Divorce rate tripling, a lot of latchkey kids, a lot of single mothers, a lot of missing fathers, and I think there's just a sort of an anxiousness that just sort of was just sort of a simmering out in the American culture, and kind of rising. And when things are like that, you'll often get a national story, like a news story or something. And there were a couple where there was a little Jessica fell down a well. There was the Adam Walsh story. Several things happened where all of a sudden you started getting these mail order campaigns, and the kids on the milk cartons start back then, and essentially, there were these statistics used to come out that there were 500, 200,000, 500,000 missing kids, and according to FBI statistics, it never got above 50 or 60, never got over 100, and this is in a nation of 300 million people. So that, I mean, it is a very rare thing for people to actually be abducted by strangers, and the way they were forming those. Well, you know what? I'll actually get into that in a later class. But this has been with us for a while, and I think Haidt's and Skenazy's basic antidote to all this is free play, and the kids need to be out, be out roaming their neighborhoods and playing out in the streets and at the park and he pointed out, right, if you tend to get multiple generations of kids out at the park, and you know what, the older, bigger kids learn empathy and how to kind of care for the younger kids, and they if they're going to pitch the ball to them, they have to throw it a bit softer, and they learn to adapt, and the younger kids learn to not whine and cry over every little thing, because they don't want to lose their the credibility and respect with the older kids, right? Kids have to learn how to problem solve. They become imaginative. I've watched the kids on skateboards a few times. I've seen Jordan Peterson, another interesting thinker, all over YouTube, talk about this, where you watch these kids on skateboards, and the school was supposedly closed, but they would go, they were hopping up on, the things kids do on skateboards, right? They're hopping up on stone walls or sliding down the stair railing and doing all these. You know what? Those boys in that group he saw were kind of learning their place in the group, right? They're socializing themselves, and they're training to become adults. They're learning to take risks, to manage risks. They learn how to get hurt and to deal with it. They learn to deal with their fear of falling. All these sort of little lessons. And when I was a kid roaming through my neighborhood, I knew there were older kids, and some were there was a few bad bullies in my neighborhood. We all took a punch in the mouth at some point. It was part of growing up, and you know what? You learn how to negotiate tough situations like that. Either avoid them, or to fight back, or to talk them down. You learn how to, you invent new games and new rules. And it is amazing what kids can sometimes come up with. I always remember this one. This is the last one I'll give you here. And when I was in grad school, I used to sometimes go across the street there was a park over there, and it had a like AstroTurf in it, the park. It actually went a bit cheesy, and sort of small, but that was what these kids had in Washington Heights, poor section, near Harlem and New York, and they were playing baseball. And I remember watching, they'd figured out, I think they'd made their own ball, and it was out of like duct tape, and it might have just been socks or something rolled up in the middle of it, but it was just a bit, it was heavy. It was almost as heavy as like a hard ball. But it was sort of softer in the middle, so the ball just didn't go as far. And so they figured out a way to design a ball, right, themselves, so that the biggest, strongest, the best athlete, the strongest kid there could barely reach the fence when he swung, so they didn't have to keep going out to 138th Street and chasing the ball around out in that traffic, which was they'd have to go a long way around to get there. So it's just sort of brilliant. And they played pitcher's hand, and if you don't know what pitcher's hand is, in baseball, instead of having a first baseman, all the fielders, they just throw the ball to the pitcher, and if the ball gets to the pitcher's glove before you get to the base, you're automatically out. But they did something even more, by the way, which is that they eliminated first base, and you just ran straight to second base. But it was like a 20 feet further. It was a longer run, which made it again, they engineered the game brilliantly, just so that when the kids went out there, the kids in the field wouldn't be in the field for 45 minutes. They can get the 3 outs quickly enough, and they get bored and leave, and the game wouldn't work. So kids, I think out free play. I think they make a good point. You are learning a lot when you're doing that. You're training to be a citizen and an adult, even a someday parent yourself. You're learning to sort of have empathy for those who who are weaker than you, and negotiate with those that have more power than you do, and learning how to just overall sort of live in the world, and learning how to deal with disappointment and failure, and that it isn't the end of the world. And that, I think, is certainly an important thing, and to make someone anti-fragile, which is the Nassim Nicholas Taleb term he coined, so that if anything, you get stronger by facing adversity, not weaker. Something we all need. All right, that's it for that. I'll see you next time.